Everybody, we're going to get started here in just a second. Give you guys one more minute before we get going. Let me back to the share here. So, hope everybody's having a good day. Hope you guys are hearing me okay. Let me check my microphone. Yeah, it seems okay. There's a chat in the QA section if you want to jump in there at all. If you have questions or whatever, see what's out there, feel free. So, one more minute. Actually, we'll give it less than a minute since you guys are all here on time. We'll get started. All right. So the title of this webinar is What to Expect When You're Onboarding a New IT Documentation Solution. That's a bit of a mouthful. So that's something right there. But I think the point of this is just kind of things to think about when you are starting a IT documentation solution, whether you're using the product that we offer from Graphical Networks, NetTerrain, or somebody else's product. And there's a lot of products out there to document your network. I think the point is, when you're moving away from something like Visio Excel, things to think about. So I'm this guy down here in the bottom right, Jason. I don't know if I'm a director, but it's nice to see. Must have got a promotion. But anyway, I've been at Graphical Networks a long time. I do a lot of pre and post sale things. So show off the product, talk about technical stuff, talk about how to use the tool, train people, etc. So, and the guy on the left, Fred, he's director of sales. You can reach him if you have questions, pricing, stuff like that. You want to see a fuller demo, whatever, you can reach out to Fred. So. So we got 30 minutes. I don't know if we're going to use all 30 or not, but so this is kind of the agenda. Got a couple polling questions, and then we'll talk about NetTerrain, and I'm talk about other things too besides just NetTerrain, the product. I'm not here just to show you our product, but again to kind of talk to you about IT documentation solutions. But again, what to expect when you're onboarding a new IT documentation solution. So why do you need an IT documentation solution? Well, maybe you're using Visio or spreadsheets or Google Earth, and you need something, more sort of purpose built for network documentation. Those are all good tools, obviously, but at some point, Visio is got some limitations on how you view things. Spreadsheets are not very visual, and Google Earth is pretty visual, but it's got some limitations as far as, especially if you get into like fiber strands and things like that. It's not too ideal for that. So you want to troubleshoot faster, contain IT spending. Documentation can certainly help in some of those areas, and search for information, etc. So what to expect when you're looking at solutions, implementation approaches, how to best allocate your manpower for documentation. So we kind of touch on these things, maybe not in like super detail on all these things, but we've certainly been involved in projects and know a lot of customers who use our tool, with respect to documentation, and kind of places to start, why things I think are successful or why things fail. We always have our opinions there as well. So looks like there's probably a couple polling questions. So let me see what we got. We got two. We got current documentation. What do you currently use to document? You can choose more than one, and you can obviously see all those options that are there. So if there's something you guys use, if you want to let us know, that's great. Visio and Google Earth. Visio is usually the top dog. Well, actually, I think spreadsheets are usually the big winner. There's an other Visio. Coworkers who know everything. That's always important. So that's all good. So, all right. So in this case, it looked like Visio was the sort of the top, but Google, other coworkers seem to know everything. So that's good. And then there was one more. I'll just do this one now. What do you need to document? I think it's more specific to you. What you might be looking for? Network, data center, fiber, other. I guess there should have been in all of the above here. So, but it looks like you can choose more than one. So there you go. So networks, fiber, outside plant. Yeah, it's good stuff. Not getting any data centers, so I guess mainly have networks and fiber here today. So that's good. All right, thanks. All right, so let's do some net terrain in action. I'm going to stop the share here, and I'm going to move it to. I'm going to share my net terrain. That's our tool, but I'm going to use this kind of in terms of getting started with a project, right? So if you want to do network documentation, where do you start? Where do you go? And that sort of thing. So I have some topics I'm going to talk about. So for me, the first thing you look at is, do you have a real need for a solution like us, right? Is it worth the money you're going to spend? Because it's not just the software cost you look at, right? You have ongoing maintenance. You have, and I personally think the software cost is usually the lower end of the thing. The other cost you have to look at, of course, is the manpower cost. How much time and effort and energy is going to go into the project? Of course, are you going to get your return on all that investment, right? So you obviously, I mean, some of that's kind of obvious, right? But the software cost is just one piece. So we're pretty flexible as far as cost goes. When you're looking for a software tool, if you're just looking like, hey, I need to document fiber cables and strands, and that's it, at least for start. That price could be pretty low. I mean, our entry level is like 500 objects a user, and I know you don't really know what that means exactly, but let me go back into net terrain here. So let me show you some drawings, and this is again just for kind of reference. But if I come into here, and somebody said, "Oh, I got to do my university campus." I mean, you look at something like this and you go, "Boy, this is a lot of work. It's gonna be expensive," and so on. Maybe not. From the standpoint of us, if you said, "Oh, I need to document sort of the head end, the entryway of fiber into each building," so primary patch panel, LIU, whatever you're going to call it. I've got some patching out in the field inside manholes. That's it. That's what I want to do in my fiber cables. For me, that's really not that big a deal, because it's, you count the buildings, you count sort of the main equipment that your fiber connects to, maybe the patching devices, manholes, handholds, et cetera. 300, 400, 500 objects, right? That's pretty much base package for us. So, depending on what you get, whether it's hosted yearly or you're going to host it yourself, there's a couple other factors. Talk to sales about it. What's the cost on that? So I don't think it's that high, honestly. Now, if you said I've got thousands of objects in a data center or data centers, and I've got 100 users who need to be editors, yeah, that's going to get certainly more costly, but that's a much larger project too. So, but anyway, back to the point, sort of the topic at hand. When you're thinking in terms of sort of getting started on a project like this, right? What, again, our topic, what to expect when you're onboarding. So assuming you're onboarding, you've already made that decision. You've said, hey, I want to document such and such. So I think the big thing when you're actually talking about onboarding is, okay, we've made a decision. We're going to, we know what we want to do. Make sure there's no creep in the project. If it's really, hey, outside plant, fiber cables, strands, et cetera, focus on that. That's your core. How do we get started? Well, for me, I think one of the big things is you have to look at the data to fulfill the project. So again, if we're talking about the project itself, what to expect when you're onboarding, the new IT documentation, well, one of the things you got to expect is, how are we going to get the data we need for the project? Now, in some cases, you might be in great shape. You might be like, we've got Excel spreadsheets with all the data we need. We have network monitoring systems that have data in it, management systems, and so on. A lot of tools can connect to data and use that. We certainly can, either through REST APIs or through basic, hey, Excel import. Excel's your friend. We allow you to pretty much create your whole project from Excel. So that might be where your data comes from. So again, when you get back to looking at things, and you're like, well, I'm going to onboard this new tool that we bought. Where do I begin? Well, one of the places you begin, of course, is the data. The other is who's, of course, involved with the project, who's going to be your primary person or persons involved in it. Something else that a lot of folks, I think, forget about or don't talk about is, of course, you need a primary person or persons involved in the project who's going to be doing sort of the work day to day, but also the processes. So, you think in terms of, again, I've got a network, and you're documenting, again, it might just be fiber cables, which is fine. And forget about the fact that this has buildings and floors and rooms and all kinds of stuff, right? It might just be a primary patch panel in every building that you're documenting. But one of the things you have to be aware of is, what is the process to make sure that I haven't gone out and done a whole bunch of work, gathering data, putting in, all the equipment where it's supposed to be, documenting all this, and someone comes along and goes, hey, I'm just going to randomly take a fiber cable that's here, and I'm going to move it down here. Now I'm doing it in the documentation in the tool, right? I'm swapping where this thing's connected, but in real life, you're standing in front of the equipment and you just move the patch panel over. Well, great. I moved the patch panel, and guess what happened? Well, my documentation's out of date, right? So either I need a tool that's discovering that and knowing what's happening, or more important, I think, is you need a process around it that says, hey, if you're changing anything in the network, make sure that there's a process involved. So again, when you're talking about what to expect when you're onboarding a new IT documentation solution, one of the things you have to take into account is, what are the processes to follow with respect to keeping things up to date? Because again, I've seen this, over and over, where you go through the effort of building documentation and trying to build it over time and keep it accurate, but then you don't have the processes in place to make sure it stays up to date. I mean, most people have ticketing systems where you go out and you set up a ticket to install a new piece of hardware, new switch, new router, new LIU, new whatever it is, or say, hey, we have a ticket open to install a new circuit between two buildings, right? Well, as part of that ticketing system process, there should be a piece that says, was this documented, right? Was this put into whatever tool that we've purchased to make sure that happens? I think that's a critical piece, because as soon as people stop trusting your documentation, they're absolutely not going to keep looking at it, right? Then you've really wasted your money, right? And a lot of it from that standpoint. So keep that in mind. So defining the project scope. Hopefully you've done that before you obviously bought a tool, because you've paid for it and so on. But you have to define the data. What data do we need to fulfill the project? What are the processes that need to be put into place to make sure the data stays up to date? And these things can be running in sort of tandem. You've got your project manager or somebody that's sort of helping to run this or fulfill this. You gather the data, and then you're like, okay, well, how are we going to get the data into the system? So the other thing you think in terms of is, getting the data, obviously starting to move it in through Excel, or again, through some other connector options that your vendor has to bring in the data. Now, if you're a visual tool like we are, one of the things we always talk about is, again, this sort of expectation of building these projects, things you have to think about is if you're doing, whether you're doing rack elevations, which obviously I have a lot of rack elevations here, but again, if you're just sort of documenting just directly into a manhole or into a building. So for instance, maybe this building here, and you're like, maybe you don't care about the pictures of the actual building, and I don't care about the floors or any of that stuff, right? So maybe I'm just trying to document from the standpoint of, again, just a sort of a primary patch panel or something that I'm going to bring into the system. So, if that's the case, then that's fine. You sort of bring those things in. Let me hide this little guy here. I want to get rid of him. So you bring in just sort of the core things. But again, if you're sort of a visual tool like we are, we actually have images that represent the devices themselves typically. And when you drill down into the device, you have things like ports or cards and so on. If your tool is similar or does those sorts of things, is more visual, then of course you need to have a catalog of objects. So on the right-hand side, we have nodes, racks, devices. So one of the things you do is when you start a project like onboarding, network IT documentation, and so on, one of the things you're going to do is you go through and look at all the equipment you have. What is the manufacturer and model of equipment that we have? And you want to make sure that that's in the catalog when you get started with your project. Now, for us and our customers, we'll build equipment for you, devices that aren't in the catalog already, because we have quite a pretty large catalog. We'll create things for you, but you can create them yourself too. You don't need us to do it. So if you prefer to kind of just build your own stuff, you can do that, but there's a lot of stuff in there, or you can request it. But again, one of those things, hey, what do we have to think about when we're onboarding new IT documentation solution? I think, it's important if it's, again, sort of visual like we are, you want to make sure you have the objects, the catalog objects, and so on. So I think the data is usually the real big thing, because especially outside plant, if you don't have data, how do you get it? You have to go down to manholes, figure out splicing and all that stuff, and that's not documented already. Of course, you have to go in and manually go sort of start to build that documentation. Of course, a tool like ours or whatever you purchase will be the place that you end up putting that data. So anyway, so back to it, you're defining the project. What data do we need? How are we going to get the data? Do we have the data? If not, how do we go get it? And then catalog objects, if again, it's sort of a visual tool like we are. And then in addition to that, you start to think in terms of the project scope. You already kind of know what you're documenting, but okay, in case of a tool, again, of course, I go back as us as a reference because I'm talking about our tool. We're a hierarchical tool, right? You start at a high level, like a top level, and you can work your way down into a lot of detail, like buildings, floors, and rooms, and all those things. However, it's not something you necessarily need to or even want to do. I mean, there's no reason to go all the way down to a room. One, there's licensing implications, but two, it's a lot more work, right? So again, I go back to, if you said, hey, I just need to document my core fiber between buildings. I'm going to tell you to lay out your buildings, put your core devices inside each building where the fiber comes in, and pretty much call it a day. Of course, you have to go out and figure out if they're splicing out in the field. You got to put your manholes in, and so on. And figure out all those connections, all the splicing, all the, how things are physically connected together. These are all my strands for a 72-strand fiber cable in this example. So, there's quite a bit of work to do there, but that's easier to kind of take on that project than to say, oh, I want to go into floors and rooms and go find floor plans. Those are stuff you can do down the road. If you need to or want to at that point. A lot of successful projects that I see personally, I think they're somewhat well defined. They definitely go through the steps of getting the data, and again defining catalog objects, and sort of doing some good planning up front, but also just limiting what they're going to really work on and go, hey, where's our major pain? Let's focus on that. Let's get that taken care of, and then they'll see, and once those are done, then usually you'll start to see things start to build out. Other departments, other groups, or you're the group you're in is like, okay, now let's go and add this into it and this, and kind of build up over time. Or they just leave it as is. But and again, I'd fall back on, hey, make sure you check out those processes and as well, put those in place. So there's other things you'll do too. I mean, you're going to identify, again, going back to like a tool like ours, but even if it's not a visual tool like us, even if it's more like a forms-based tool, you still need to identify what it is you want to document, whether it's a building, a floor, a room, the actual device types, the models, those types of things. You really have to kind of define all that. Of course, somebody has all that information in their head, or it's in spreadsheets. You just have to start to take all that and bring it into a tool like ours. So when new people come along, hey, it's all documented, and it certainly makes, I think, it easier to troubleshoot, find information, and so on. Because in our tool, of course, we have search, the ability to search, the ability to generate circuit diagrams and views, Just as an example, I'll just go click on one of these, but this is kind of where it all leads back to. You know, you put sort of the work into being able to connect all these things together, and then at the end of the day, once you have this documentation built out, or starts to get built out, then you can generate, reports and various things and diagrams like this, which show you circuit pathways end to end, the fiber strands, all the equipment that are involved in that circuit path, and so on. So anyway, I'm rambling on for a bit. If there's any questions, let me know. That's kind of what I wanted to talk about. But if there's more specific things, of course, you can reach out to us, or if you want to see our product in a little more detail. But no matter what, when you're going out and looking at software, there's, especially for network documentation, there's certain things you got to look at. And again, to reiterate, you want to definitely look through, think in terms of the project, the data you need to fulfill the project. Where's the data going to come from? Do we have that data? Do we have to go collect that data through inventories and audits? And of course, who's involved in the project? Process built around the project, so the project itself can be, fulfilled. So, but anyway, that's that. So, any questions? Let me know in the chat. Otherwise, we can. I'll give you a few minutes back of your time, so you can go work on your network documentation, no doubt. So if you do have a question, again, you can reach out. Actually, let me stop the share here and let me reshare my back to my PowerPoint. There we go. So we saw sort of net terrain in action a little bit. And yeah, discover more. You can reach out to Fred. You can go to our website, graphicalnetworks.com. We do have demos. You can go out and do a demo, netterrain.us. You can sign up for a 14-day trial. I would talk to Fred or have a demo in person before you maybe go down that path, just so you kind of know what to expect. Plus, you can schedule time to have somebody kind of walk you through using the tool a little bit when you sign up, and kind of go from there. So anyway, thanks everybody for your time. If you guys have questions, please reach out. Talk to you later. Bye.